Donald Trump made a "my lips are sealed" gesture outside his civil fraud trial today, but he was anything but tight-lipped on the stand.
Extraordinary tension inside that courtroom, with Donald Trump really pushing and pushing and pushing the judge.
Trump sure looked ready for a fight as he glared at the camera. He clashed with Judge Arthur Engoron from the moment he took the stand, giving long speeches instead of yes and no answers. "This is a very, very unfair trial. Very," Trump complained. "Control your client," the judge told Trump's attorneys. "If you can't, I will." He even snapped at lawyer Alina Habba, telling her to sit down when she insisted maybe he should listen to Trump's long-winded rants. She hit back outside the courthouse.
"I was told to sit down today. I was yelled at, and I've had a judge who is unhinged slamming a table. Let me be very clear. I don't tolerate that in my life. I'm not going to tolerate it."
Greetings, Dr. Podcast John, therefore. What transpired just now is absolutely massive. Guys, Trump has spent a lot of time convincing his supporters that he is the king of the courtroom. His legal battles are demonstrations of his command, and judges bow to his presence. The unadulterated collision of that mythology and reality that millions of people just witnessed in that Manhattan courtroom. When Judge Arthur Engoron decided that the standard rules of American jurisprudence were going to apply in his courtroom regardless of who the defendant happened to be, that mythology hit a brick wall. There was no dominance that followed. It was not a directive. It was a 6-minute spiral that culminated in the judge telling Trump's own attorney to control his client, cutting him off completely, and declaring the whole thing illegal.
The judge in this case, Judge Engoron, however, was visibly frustrated with Trump repeatedly during the course of his testimony, urging Trump's lawyers to get their client, to get the witness in line, to say yes or no to yes or no questions. And at one point, Judge Engoron warned Trump's legal team that if Trump did not change his conduct in the courtroom in terms of how he answered questions, he would have, quote, negative inferences when it came to the scope of the penalty in this ongoing civil.
The transcript, the footage, and the footage themselves all document something far more significant than a bad day for a defendant. It records the exact moment when the performance exceeded its capabilities and fell short. Allow me to properly set the scene because the context is crucial to comprehending the significance of this confrontation. The case that struck at the core of Trump's carefully cultivated business persona was the closing argument phase of the New York civil fraud trial. The type of financial representation that helped build the Trump brand over decades was the subject of the allegations, which involved systematic inflation of asset values.
New York judge now ruling that former President Donald Trump committed fraud and lied about his net worth for years. And according to the court documents just into us, Mr. Trump apparently, according to this judge, lied to banks and insurers, exaggerating his net worth to the tune of something like billions of dollars. This is all ahead of a civil trial that is set to begin on Monday. I want to get right to Tom Winter. Explain what the judge is saying here and its significance.
Right. So the judge is basically saying that the Attorney General for the state of New York, Letitia James, came forward with a civil complaint last year and said that the former president, through his businesses and his personal financial representations, committed fraud by overstating his personal wealth and the wealth of his property.
For a man whose entire identity is based on the idea that he is a brilliant businessman, whose net worth is exactly what he claims it to be, the stakes were enormous, not just financially, but also spiritually. Trump desired to make his own final argument. That was his requirement. He wanted to make his case directly to the judge in front of court, not through the careful procedural mechanisms of legal representation, but through his own voice. The request was unusual by itself. In civil trials, defendants rarely provide their own closing statements. That is the job of lawyers. However, Trump is not your typical defendant. And throughout these proceedings, his legal strategy has consistently blurred the line between advocacy in court and political theater.
Fireworks in the courtroom. Donald Trump delivering his own closing argument in his Manhattan civil fraud trial today, facing the prospect of losing control of his namesake company and a massive civil penalty. Mr. Trump briefly took matters into his own hands, declaring himself an innocent man, delivering a nearly 5-minute speech, largely grievances against the New York Attorney General and the judge overseeing the case, whom he accused of having his own agenda. All that forcing Judge Arthur Engoron, who previously resisted granting the former president permission to speak in closings, to call on Mr. Trump's attorneys to, quote, control their client.
They don't have any evidence against us. Millions and millions of pages, years of litigation. and all politically motivated.
The surreal scene in court today playing out just hours after police responded to a bomb threat at Judge Engoron's home.
Judge Engoron was open to thinking about it. He did not outright reject the request, but he imposed a condition, the same condition that any judge would impose on any defendant seeking to address the court directly. It was necessary for Trump's legal team to guarantee that their client would adhere to the evidence and the law. There were no political rants, no campaign speeches, and no new material that had not been presented during the trial was introduced. The facts of the case and the applicable legal standards were all that were considered. Before Trump ever spoke, this was a point where everything started to fall apart. That was not a promise made by his lawyers. Consider what that means. The officers of the court, who were representing the former president of the United States in a civil fraud trial and are bound by ethical obligations of candor and professionalism, were unable to guarantee the judge that their client would adhere to fundamental courtroom protocol if given the opportunity to speak. They were aware of his actions. They were aware that the judge had established limits, and he was unable to control himself. They also refused to keep their word and watched him break it instead of keeping their promise. As a result, the judge turned down Trump's request to give a formal closing statement. The closings would be handled by lawyers, as they do in virtually every civil trial in every American courtroom. It ought to have come to an end at that point. The customary closings continued. Arguments were made in court. The case was coming to a close, but Trump's team was not done.